Thank you for everyone for coming together to discuss your journey as a female acquisition entrepreneur. I'm Chelsea Wood, Managing Director for Acquisition Lab and M&A Advisor. One of the biggest challenges that I've personally experienced in the space is a lack of representation of women. I've always been one of a few women in a sea of hundreds of M&A professionals, and unfortunately, the lab membership and the applicant base reflects the same. For some reason, it seems like men are more likely to pursue this path than women. And so to shine a light on the fact that it is a wonderful and very fulfilling path that women should embrace, I'm joined today by three successful female acquisition entrepreneurs, Cassi Niekamp, Ristic, and Morli Desai. They're going to share their stories about their individual journeys with you and lessons that they've learned in hopes of inspiring other women to take control of their career paths and buy their next adventure. We're going to get started with Cassi. So, Cassi, can you talk to us a little bit about how you made the decision to buy a company?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Chelsea. The decision to own a company seemed very far off initially for my husband and I. We had talked about one day owning a business, one day, creating our own path, I guess. You sit through enough bad corporate meetings or have enough bad leaders and you think, I can maybe do this better for, somebody else. And that was kind of our case. Personally, we had gone through a lot of challenges in having a second child. And I had just suffered a miscarriage, and I was feeling very introspective about how I wanted to spend my time. And all of the sudden, those bad corporate meetings became worse for me. And I'm like, this is not it. This is not my talents are more suited in something else. And I just had this internal itch. So I kind of took a leap by doing some research on my own and drug my husband behind me. And I said, there is this amazing business for sale. I think we have to go take a look at it. And he was like, we are not buying a business. This is not a good time. And after that first meeting with the seller, we walked away and we went out for drinks and he goes, we're buying this business. And it was just like this kismet meeting between the seller and us. And it just felt at home and very peaceful. I think that if I were to go back to my younger self, I would say maybe it would not be wise to tell others that the first business you interact with is the only, the business you buy. I don't know if that's the resounding message I want people to take away from this. But it just happened where all the doors opened along our due diligence process and made a really neat transition for us and a very cohesive transition with the former owner.
No, and I love the message to your younger self. And I'm wondering, when you told your support system that you were going to buy a business, how did they react?
Okay, so we bought a fencing company. It was a 40-year-old fencing company. It was doing less than $1 million, roughly about 700,000. The owner was a fencing installer. Like, he knew fencing all of his life. His dad was a fencing installer. My family is full of construction men and women, my entire family. And so we're very comfortable with construction. My family is not very comfortable with risk, I have found. They were like, this is a bad idea. You know nothing. I'm like, no, I know I don't know anything about fencing, but I have an idea around business, and that's what I want to do to, look at all this low-hanging fruit. This is amazing. This is a gold mine. They were like, no, I don't think so. Oddly enough, my mother-in-law, who's a nurse, knows nothing about business, just a big fan of Cassie, was my biggest cheerleader. She's like, "You can do anything. You're amazing." And, that was really kind of the interesting, dichotomy between my mother-in-law knowing nothing about construction, nothing about business, versus my family saying, I think you better think again," so it's been fun.
No, that's wonderful. How did it impact you having that kind of conflict? So you had your mother-in-law supporting you, you had your family kind of going, what is, like, you're insane, which by the way is a normal reaction to going and buying a business. We're all a little crazy for doing it.
Yeah.
But how did that affect you and your journey?
There was one conversation that kind of put me back on my heels, and that was my brother's an electrician, an amazing, hardworking man. It was over New Year's Eve, 2021. Picture this. The ball is dropping. The cocktails are flowing. And he's like, "You're insane. You know nothing. Like, this is not a wise decision." And My husband is so level-headed and he's so supportive, and he's got a gift of a visionary. If you know much about EOS, he's the visionary, I'm the implementer. Um, and I was like, "Oh, no, my own brother doesn't think this is a good idea, and I'm about to take on a team of 8 of him. This won't land well during the transition. How will I win their approval? How will I get them on my team?" And I remember going to bed that night thinking, "I might be too in deep. Like, what have I thought?" And on the way home, we always do New Year's Eve in a cabin, so there's a drive home. Um, I said to my husband, I'm like, "Are we crazy? Are we off? Like, have we got it all wrong?" And we talked through it, and at the time, we were like, "He has some valid points, but here's how we're gonna approach it differently." And, that gave me kind of the reassurance around, "Let's stay the course and see this through." So,
Oh, I love that. And you had already successfully bought a law firm or built a law firm. And so how did you, make the decision like, I'm good with that. Now I'm gonna go buy a business."
So it's so interesting to hear Cassie's story because lots of parallels, but lots of really different things. And, probably the biggest thing is my life stage, right? Like I was for sure late career. I had been at my law firm for my entire career, which was over 30 years. And I had been in this management role for, co-managing partner for about 20 years. So, I didn't so much decide, it was kind of a two-step process for me. Well, it was many steps, but I didn't start with I'm going to buy a business. I was more thinking about, I had kind of reached a certain ceiling. I mean, I loved my job, I loved my firm, but I wasn't going to be able to continue to grow and do different things. And what I liked about, my um, experience in the firm was the growth journey that, I'd had early in my tenure where we were really growing as a law firm. Um, the firm is fantastic, still growing, still doing great. But I mean, it wasn't at that really ambitious growth phase that I had really loved. And so my management role was more, you know, continuing to shepherd things along. And I felt like I wanted to take where I really excel. So my thought was, I really like guiding an organization through growth when there's an ambitious growth goal. And so I was trying to think about where would I find that, how could I take what I had done at Stikeman Elliott, my law firm, and do that again in a different environment? But I wasn't really thinking about buying a business because, unlike Cassie, obviously I'm not that entrepreneur. And I kind of felt like other people buy businesses. Like that's a whole different thing. And it just seemed like that was not the kind of thing that a person like me would do. So there were a couple of things though for me that really kind of demystified the whole process. And that is, I've said to Will, one of the things I love about Will's podcast, which I had never, encountered until after I bought the business. But that whole sort of, it just demystifies the process. And the biggest thing for me was really, my network. So one good thing about being an older person is and having been in the workforce for so long is you have a much larger and more varied network than I did in my early stages. So there were quite a few people, although on Cassie's point, some pro, some con, but quite a few people with experience who could help me. But the key thing, that probably the biggest impact, was one of my former partners at Stikeman Elliott, Mario Negro, who does a lot of work in this space. He was talking to me about a bunch of different options kind of early in my thought process, and he was like, "But you should buy a business." And I was like, I kind of really discounted it at first because of all the things I just said, but then I kept coming back to it, and he kind of took me through. He demystified a bunch of things, like what is the process, the search, then the deal making acquisition part, then the, running and growing the business, then, the sale and exit. Like, how does that all work? He demystified the economics, like how do you get the money, and it kind of, what are you looking for? What are buyers looking for? all of this stuff, which is not kind of now in retrospect, I feel like not rocket science. And again, Will's podcast is really great for this, but I just didn't, I felt like he held up a mirror for me of like, and here are all the things that you've already done. And then there are lots of parallels in this whole now demystified process. And I did start thinking, um, I could maybe do this. And then kind of with that, as I was talking to other people in my network and talking about thinking about doing it, some were super supportive, some were like, sure, I'm sure you could do it if you want to do it, but like, why would you want to leave your ivory tower office and go do this other thing? And some people were a little bit like Cassie's brother on New Year's Eve. So, but I felt like engaging my network once the process was demystified. And Chelsea, I will also give a little plug for Buy Then Build and Walker's book, because that was the second thing, I've told Will this, that happened after I had started thinking about this and talking to Mario, is that Amazon actually recommended that I might like Buy Then Build, and I did like it because I felt like he does the same thing. Like you read it and you kind of go, okay, I could do this. Not that it's simple and not that this, it's just like rolling off a log, but it feels like, okay, these are steps that are well within my skill set. So that whole demystifying thing was really important for me, and my network, super important.
Oh, I love that, and I've heard the same thing from so many people, right? Everyone reads books, they watch podcasts, and one thing, Morley, that you mentioned was that a book was big in your journey, right? And kind of helping you think through it. Would you mind talking? I love providing books for people to read because I love this market loves that, right? Everybody wants to know the next book to read, and so would you share the book that you shared with me?
Yeah, so it kind of goes into my story about why I decided to buy a business. But I read this book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. And 4,000 Weeks is about our life, right? It's 80 years. And I turned 40 in 2021. And I was like, well, wow, I only have 2,000 weeks left. Like I need to like get on this vision that I had created. And it took me a couple of years to actually to make it happen. And yeah, in 2021, my youngest child turned 1, so he wasn't attached to me anymore. I got unmarried, and we had this pandemic, right? And that autopilot merry-go-round that we all were on came to a screeching halt. And it just made me realize that if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. And I don't want to have that regret. And so that was a big part of my decision to actually, go from reading the books and doing the research and watching the communities to actually getting out there full time. And I quit my corporate job and did it full time, and gave myself a couple of years to get out there and do it. And I was like, well, I could always go back to corporate if I need to.
Oh, I love that. And that's literally what led me to leaving corporate America to build the lab. Was I realized the number of bedtimes was finite. And I was spending so many bedtimes helping executives make their businesses better. And I realized I was running out of bedtimes. And now we have the lab. And so would you talk a little bit more, Lee, about your experience searching, right? What was the biggest challenge for you?
Yeah, I just closed my business a couple of weeks ago. So the search phase and the closing phase is very fresh in my mind. And searching was hard for me. And I had to pivot quite a bit. Searching I was very akin to sales, and I was watching some of my fellow searchers were, had these CRMs going, had these tech stacks with demand generation, automated emails going out to all the brokers. And that's just not my style. I'm more of a one-on-one relationship person. And I started reaching out to a couple of brokers, and I just wasn't getting good responses. They tend to be older white males, and it's just not as comfortable of a conversation. I think they're used to talking with other male business searchers. And so it wasn't a great kind of fit for me. So I decided to pivot to do more of a proprietary search. I was geographically focused in the greater Atlanta area. So I decided to kind of, similar to Anne, use my network and kind of see if I would have some luck there. And I did. I met a lot of great business owners and I had some great conversations. But I also got sucked up into a lot of time with these business owners that were, at the end of the day, just kicking the tires and seeing what their company was worth. I had put in 3 to 4 LOIs, and we just couldn't agree on valuation, and to no fault of their own, right? Business owners think their businesses are worth a gazillion dollars, and they just didn't have that. They hadn't had that conversation with the broker to understand, no, there's actually a marketplace, and there are comparables. You can't just ask the moon and ask for valuation based on some future potential. And so after submitting a couple of LOIs and felt like I was wasting time, I was very down because it's a very lonely process too. I found the acquisition lab, and that was what I needed to not only refine my search of what exactly I was looking for, but to also get the talk track together and to be able to go. I went back to the brokers because at least I knew with the brokers, the business owners were being schooled on what to expect from a valuation standpoint. And then lastly, the community, right? Chelsea, you were a huge part of that, having a female advisor, and I loved the women forums that you hosted, because it is lonely out there, and especially being a female searcher, and then having the advisors to help me with any of my questions. And so that was really the hard part about searching. But I felt like once I kind of got in the groove with the acquisition lab, it only took me a couple of months to find the business that I eventually closed on.
That's exciting. I loved being a part of your journey, right? I do love that the lab has given me, because the women that are there, and we have like 10% women. It's not as high as I would like it to be, but we try to support each other, and I enjoyed that. So I know, Cassie, you, when we first spoke, you shared that you had a moment where you kind of got really, really cold feet, and you manage that moment kind of by relying on your network and the people that you had brought on as your transaction team. So will you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's a common experience.
Yeah, I think for reference, we were about a month away from closing. And to Morley's point, like, we could not get the valuation to make sense with what the SBA was willing to lend. So the business thought, and with our acquisition, we actually bought 2 acres as well. So what I've learned is, like, the real estate valuation was separate from the business valuation, but we still need funding for the whole thing. And then there was an inventory component as well. The company had never done inventory. So you can imagine how gray that scenario was. It was about a month out, and I'm looking at the hard dollars. What is Cassie fronting for this SBA loan? What is coming out of our pocket? And all, by the way, this murky gray land of inventory in this 2-acre property was very troubling in terms of where the valuation actually came back at was $200,000 less than what the owner was asking for the land itself. Business valuation, perfect. Land and inventory, $200,000 less. Our lender has been an SBA lender for, let's say, 25 years. And she had said, I had never seen a discrepancy like this. Like, to bridge this gap, sister, we're in for a ride, So I'm looking at the hard dollars and cents, and I'm like, this feels scary. I make a call to our attorney, and I'm practicing my speech ahead of time of how I'm going to get out of this deal. And I'm talking to him, and I'm saying the words clear as day, I want out. And he's basically not accepting my language. He's like, I hear you, but you don't. And here's why. And he basically said, there is not a searcher I have ever worked with that has not gotten to this point, Cassie. It is normal. It is natural. Let's go back to day one, what you told me. Let's go back to the previous conversations. What you're feeling now is normal. Like, here is how we're going to attack this next couple weeks. Um, Gosh, we had such a good attorney. I mean, he's a lovely man, very experienced. And through that conversation, got me on the other side of that fear I was experiencing.
I think there's such power in choosing your transaction team, and we talk about this a lot, is you wanna make sure you're not choosing on terms or price. You're looking for strategic thought partners, and that's what I hear in what you had in your team was the strategic thought partners that kind of kept you on track. I love that he took you back to the beginning,
Absolutely.
right? I feel like if you're not scared, I've had this conversation with a few members, both pre and post close. Like if you're not scared, something's not right, right? Because it is a scary thing. You are doing something that is high risk, right? But as long as you've done your due diligence, you found a business that needs you, it's going to be fine, right? You just have to ride out the change curve, basically, if you're familiar with the change curve. No, thank you for sharing that. If we could talk a little bit about, right? So you've got the search process, and then you have like the act of actually like getting to closing, like you just shared, right? And so, would you share a little bit about, I guess, what your biggest lessons were, right, when it comes to closing and transitioning? What's your biggest kind of key takeaway that you would tell other people?
I was just thinking about this yesterday. So, gosh, I would just take walks for months leading up to the transition. And I've had time to dream about this business. I've had time to think about the people. I know more. And it's like this foreshadowing that you have around how this is going to go. And I remember the first Monday morning meeting. I have like my PowerPoint. I'm so nervous. And there's like a bunch of construction dudes sitting in a circle and they're like, "Lady, get on with it," you know? Um, and I was just so nervous because I had, this was a big moment for us. But one of the things I think we did well was the Friday before we had like a retirement going away party for the team. So it was after our signing, we could at least experience the team in a casual setting. And I observed very quickly their cliques around what crews belonged to what crews, who identified with what people. It was actually extremely interesting. And then Monday morning was when we had that formal meeting and they could sense my nerves. I'm certain of it. One of the things that we really tried to do, or I really tried to do, was listen to our team. What's worked well, what hasn't. Change is not easy for anybody. And in fact, a year and a half later, I can firmly say change management is the most difficult thing I've ever done. So I think it's getting on the same page, listening, a lot of referring back. I have asked our head field superintendent to do more and to change more in the past year and a half than probably he even realizes. And I know at times it was feeling like a bit of a wrestle, a dance. Sometimes I was frustrated, sometimes he was frustrated, sometimes we were both elated with a new idea. And I think to go back to that time though, I think I'm really proud of the actions we took. I'm proud of the slowing down to speed up that we did. And the only thing that I wish would have went a bit different is there was a very close family relationship that the former field superintendent was actually the former owner's nephew. This nephew had been running the business for 35 years. He knew 2 weeks before the company was to go to sell and came into the relationship a bit soured. When I think about my part in that, I don't think that I had a lot of advantage in that scenario. And I'm guessing that the former owner wishes he would have done things a bit different to get through that transition smoothly. He ended up staying on for about 3 months, but it was just really clear that this was just not going to work out long term. And I feel sad about that for him. Our companies continue to grow and thrive amidst that. But I do feel sad for him about that news being presented the way it did. I think we could have had a much different outcome.
I think that's a powerful realization, and actually, one of our advisors, Kinza, was just sharing something similar on LinkedIn. It's like the people component of buying businesses is painful, right? And it's okay to have pain points around your business when it comes to the people. Not everything's going to be handled perfectly. And I think the change process in general is the most complicated part of life: business, relationships, personal, professional. And you're going through your own change journey. Your employees are going through their own change journey, and everybody interacting with your business, vendors and everybody, they're all going through their own change journey as well. And when you start to kind of have those intersect, it becomes even more painful. So I will just say, I think if everyone could give themselves some grace, that they're doing the best they can with what they have in the moment. But I do think that it's beautiful to look back and recognize that employees of businesses that are being acquired are being significantly impacted by that decision. And that's part of the reason I got into transactions, actually. My own mother went through 6 transactions and lost her job every time. And it was very painful every time. And so I was hoping that by impacting as many business owners as I've had the privilege of impacting, that we could kind of treat the human side a little bit more sensitively that it historically has been treated. And I love that you have that realization. Okay. Morli, I know that you had some challenges too. And so do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what the lesson you would impart on others around closing?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm only a couple weeks into transition. So I definitely you can come back to me in a couple months about that. But the closing part is something that's very fresh. So I ended up purchasing an e-commerce business. It's an online retailer of skincare products called Amira Natural Skincare. And I also used SBA financing. And when I had submitted my LOI, we had negotiated down to 75 days of exclusivity. And I was quick. Like, as soon as the LOI got signed, I got the bank started with their stuff. And around day 60, they still hadn't come back from underwriting. And so I was starting to freak out. Plus, this was kind of in the fall, so I'm watching the interest rates start to creep up every time there's that Fed meeting. And I'm getting nervous that, with lending requirements starting to tighten up, and it will be long stretches at a time where I'd get radio silence from the bank. And luckily around day 60, where I've got 15 days of exclusivity left, and the bank comes back with the commitment letter. And I had decided to go at risk and just get my lawyers started on the documents. Obviously, I'd gotten the accountants and the diligence firm engaged. And so I was already deep into deal fees while I was still waiting for the bank. And then even when the bank came back with their final checklist, and I had heard, you need to get life insurance, you need to get business insurance, you need to get tax clearance letters. And so the list, each one of those required, 2 weeks, 30 days to get them done. One of the things we needed was a tax clearance letter from the state of Delaware. And for being such a business-friendly state, they only did things by mail. And so we had no idea when we would get some of this stuff. And so luckily the seller was amenable to prolonging our exclusivity period. But I was getting very nervous. And we got to a point where I didn't think we'd get it done by the end of the year. And so I had gone to the bank and said, hey, what happens if this gets rolled over into the new year? And they were like, we can't guarantee you funding. You got to get this done in December. Otherwise, this deal is dead. So there was that moment, kind of similar to Cassie, where I was like, oh my God, I don't know if this is going to get done, right? The bank is telling me that the deal's got to get done. And then we were already in December. And we still had these checklist items because we were waiting for the life insurance to come back after the physical. We were waiting for the business insurance to get bound after that piece. We were waiting for this elusive tax clearance letter that only gets sent in the mail. And it just miraculously happened kind of mid-December, within 24 hours. All these final pieces somehow kind of came to fruition, and we were able to get it closed kind of late December, right before Christmas. And so looking back, I don't know if there's anything I could have done differently. except my advice is, especially if you've got a lender or you've got the SBA, to stay on top of it and make sure they've ordered the appraisal, they've done the title search, there's just all these random requirements, and banks are very bureaucratic, and they will not close if they don't have every single checklist item. Even if you're like, it's got to be here in 2 days, they will hold the closing. And then just making sure you're communicating with the seller and just explaining to them that it's not in your control. Like, I was on the phone every day with multiple people, and just saying, hey, we've got to speed this up. We got to speed this up. I'm going to lose this deal. And so, yeah, it's a roller coaster. So also be ready for that piece of it.
No, I think that, and I've seen a deal fall apart for the opposite, right? There was a member who didn't push things through, right? They really did just kind of wait for the bank to let them know things were happening. And so I think that's really, really a keen insight to provide, is that you are driving the bus, right? And you have to make sure that you drive it the entire way. If you sit back and you wait for things to happen, then you're right. I do think that that's how deals can fall apart. Somebody has to be driving, and it is you. It doesn't feel like it's you because there's a lot of other people, right, that you have to kind of keep on track, but it is you driving. I think that's really helpful. Thank you. And as a female business owner, what do you think your biggest kind of hurdle has been?
Well, so I would say I probably have a couple of comments. One is gender related and one's not gender related. So let me start with the one that's not a gender
Perfect.
point. So I feel like, and this is going to sound like so stating the obvious, knowing yourself and knowing your skill set is super important. So I talked about kind of the fact that kind of deconstruct, and we've talked about it here too, kind of deconstructing those phases in the search and then acquisition and then operating, and that's like those are really, really different, and they take really different skills. You need to be able to obviously participate and do them all. But I felt like, what is the part where I excel, what's my sweet spot? For me, that is kind of the operational organic growth phase. And so, but you need obviously to do the search and do the acquisition. And, when, again, I'm going to talk about Will's podcast guests, lots of, you listen to them, lots of them clearly like they revel in the search and acquisition phase. And then once they buy a company, it's a platform and they're going to be serial acquirers, and that whole sort of acquisition is the goal. For me, I mean, I'm certainly keeping my eyes open, and I'm open to bolt-on acquisitions or whatever. So it's not that I'm not planning on more acquisitions. But for me, I was looking for a business, wanting to find a business where I could excel in that sort of operation and growth and so on. And I think that one of the you know I'm going to frame it as a positive as opposed to a hurdle. One of the things that you can really do is, think about where you're going to focus, and maybe how you're going to fill in, the gaps that you have. If you're not like I didn't even know the term search as a term in this environment. I sort of so, partnering up with, I have a colleague in the acquisition that we did who was like the classic searcher. So that was good that we were, able to be complementary. So is it a hurdle? Is it a learning? For me as a female business owner, like, know your skills and know the different phases, and surround yourself with people who can help you at the phases that you're maybe not as adept. On the on the on the gender related point, I would say that I have a very, and this was the case in the law firm and is the case now, I have a very sort of consultative and collaborative leadership style. And, it's not just my personality or my personal style. It is the way that I have found is the, best way to empower the team and get the most out of the, team. And for me, it really has been a way to get things done and really accomplish things. And I think there's lots of research from, Jim Collins and Good to Great on about how that is a really good leadership style to have. Um, I would say, though, that it's a double-edged sword if you're a woman, maybe using that leadership style, because, um, people kind of don't, maybe sometimes they don't think that maybe you're as experienced and knowledgeable because you're not laying down the law and telling them what to do. You're sort of consulting and what do you guys think? And I do have people in my network from my old law firm and out who are like, "Anne, you're being too modest. You got to lay down the law a little bit more." If I were a man, again, and I shouldn't I shouldn't say this because I'm not a man, so I can't, make this assumption. But I kind of assume that if I were a man at my stage of life and I was, kind of consulting, people would be saying, "Isn't that great that that guy, with all the experience he has, he's consulting us and he's talking to us, and that's really great. He's a really good leader because he's doing this stuff." Whereas I get a little bit more of the, "Man, you gotta be more, you're too modest." So is that a hurdle? I feel like I don't know. We play the hand we have, and I feel like it works for me, and I'm able to, over time, you know, people understand that you know what you're doing, and they do. You earn that respect. But I feel like you have to be prepared to put the time in, to have the calling card, to say I know what I'm doing, and just kind of ride out those moments when people are kind of looking at you like she doesn't know what she's talking about, or why are we listening to her?
No, I think that's beautiful. I think that as somebody that also has a collaborative leadership style, it can often be seen as you're being timid or you're not being assertive enough. But I think while you have to battle how it's perceived, it's really effective from an employee engagement perspective, right? And it helps as a business owner because you don't know everything yet, right? And so, but if you were to go in there and act like you did, you would shut down all of the employees, right? And so by having that collaborative approach, you're able to really engage them in the process. So for me, my Chelsea's opinion is the more you can make a transaction feel like it's not happening to someone, instead that it's happening with them, the better you're
Yeah,
going to be in
I agree.
general. And
Yeah.
so I think that a collaborative
It
approach
is
helps
all
that.
I'm saying is it's a trade-off. You get a lot from it, and you have to manage this, you know, the impression that people have that maybe you're not as experienced as you are because of whatever you're collaborating or asking questions or consulting about.
No, and I digging really, really deep in the recesses of my mind. Like I kind of remember studying leadership style and culture and gender back in college, and collaborate a more collaborative approach is pretty common for females, I believe, and in collectivistic cultures. So the United States is a more individualistic society, as I'm sure we are all aware. So, in closing, anyone that's watching this, whether they're female or male or anyone kind of thinking about buying a business, right? Um, what advice would you give someone that's considering acquisition entrepreneurship? Let's start with
Okay, well,
Anne.
I'll just kind of continue on the theme that I was just talking about. So I would say my biggest piece of advice that I would give myself, my younger self, my current self, and others is don't be intimidated by the fact that you don't have all the skills to do all the phases of all the things in the search, acquisition, growth, operational phase. Um, again, I think there's lots of research that women only apply for jobs if they have 100% of the qualifications or think they have 100% of the qualifications, whereas I'm going to have the statistic wrong, but men will apply if they have 60 or something like that, maybe even less. And I kind of think that kind of is happening here. And it happened to me, and there's no excuse for me because I'm like experienced and old enough not to have been doing that. But even I was going like, well, how would I even be able to buy a business? And I had done acquisitions as a lawyer. I had run a business, and even I was kind of going, well, I don't have 100% of the qualifications, which is true. But that's also true of everyone. And everyone who's been on Will's podcast or who's in the search community or who is, doing going through a more traditional path. So I feel like you need to be a learner and you need to be somebody who's prepared to fill in all the gaps to recognize your gaps and fill in the gaps that you don't have. But it's not impossible to do. It's not something that you haven't done in your past. And I do feel like, again, I'm saying this totally anecdotally, but I feel like that might be a bit of a barrier for women getting into the search part. They feel like they need to be perfectly qualified and have an MBA and be at the exact right stage in their lives that they look like everybody else that's doing a search. And, I would say I would encourage people not to do that. And I love hearing from Cassie and Morley and hearing about doing it at an earlier stage in life when when my kids were small, I was like, I was going to work. I was an income. I was not taking any risks. Um, but I feel like, be open to taking these steps or taking these risks when you're at a life stage where you're able to do it. That would be my advice.
I think that's really rich, right? I think that there's a challenge that all acquisition entrepreneurs come, at least the ones I talk to, and I swear I've probably talked to thousands at this point, this fear of not knowing everything, right? The biggest hurdle is like, well, I don't know how to read financial statements, or well, I don't know how to conduct due diligence. And I always tell everybody, you don't have to. Get a team, right? Surround yourself with a good team and you'll be fine, right? As long as you believe that at the end of the day, you will be able to figure things out in a business, go buy a business, right? Morley, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say if you want to be an entrepreneur, surround yourself with other entrepreneurs. And it's what they say, like, if you want to work out, hang out with people that work out. If you want to eat well, go to dinner with people that eat well. If you want to be a badass boss lady, surround yourself with other badass boss ladies. And it's like, not only do you then start to see the vision when you're seeing other women and other entrepreneurs doing it, but there's just this like osmosis, right? When you're around that energy and it becomes normalized and got that community to kind of to have around you where it doesn't become as scary anymore. And that was kind of the biggest thing that I did. I joined the board of a nonprofit that supports women of color business owners and kind of watched people's journey. I joined a women's digital or women's community and co-working space that was targeted towards entrepreneurs. And so I was around them each day as they were working through kind of their challenges. And I joined the acquisition lab where you've got constant communication with, Chelsea said, I think it's 250, 300 other searchers that are doing the same thing. And kind of being in that, it becomes normal, and that the doubt starts to kind of dissipate because that's kind of what your life that you're living at that point.
No, I had a female member once say, why would anyone continue to get corporate jobs and battle the career ladder when you could buy your own business and take the career escalator? And I was like, I'm going to totally trademark that and steal it. She's like, oh, you should, because it's true, right? It's like, as women, we know, right? Corporate America doesn't necessarily cater to us super well. And this is one way that you can take control over your path. And I think the imposter syndrome is real for everyone, male, female alike. I've seen it across the board. But there are things that you can do, and it's everything you just said, Morley, to help yourself realize that you can do this, right? Cassie, what would you share?
I loved Anne and Morley's responses, championing that forever, the leaning in and, get a tribe. While I think small business ownership is probably one of the most fulfilling paths I have yet to be on in my life, I also think it is the hardest, most humbling, most gritty thing I have ever done for the past year and a half, and I've got my tail kicked. So I do not want to stand up here thinking that I've got life figured out after a year and a half, because I promise I don't. Um, but I think the thing that stands out to me is two quick things: is the ability to run your own race. So there's a lot of comparison that can happen on the acquisition atmosphere. And most of the acquisition people that I know are white males, to Morley's point. And when I hear their numbers around their profitability and their gross margins, it can start to feel like, we're not there yet. But that's okay. You know, I'm a year and a half in, they're 10 years in, or they have a different business model. It didn't come with land. Like, there's this perspective of we're not doing enough. And as a competitive person, that can start to creep into that comparison. And so I think, number one, the ability to run your own race and be confident in that. And I think second is to build that tribe, to Morley's point, to take it a step further of an industry that I was not aware of, fencing. I went to an association meeting down in New Orleans. It was the American Fence Association. And I kind of spotted top operators that I wanted to know. And I said, hey, would you be interested in jumping on a Zoom once a month and having an hour-long chat around best practices? And I thought that the meeting would be mostly to benefit me, the newest one in the room. But actually, what I found was that some of the older, more experienced operators have said what an amazing blessing this is, because now we can hear from each other's perspective and it feels less lonely. If somebody operating 10 years who, by my sights, has everything figured out and is running an amazing $10 million business, if he can say that to me, then I know we're all gleaning from it. And it's just amazing, the different backgrounds of acquisition versus they created their own business. It's just so yummy. And in addition to that, I will say I also have our own personal business coach, which I don't know if I'd still be upright had I not invested in that. Sincerely huge on the peacefulness train.
I think that all of your journeys are beautiful. I think you're all at different stages. Cassie, what I take from yours, which I think is important in life in general, just if you want to talk about joy, which apparently everyone's searching for their joy, it's comparing yourself against yourself, right? Competition is like the thief of joy. And so setting yourself goals based on your business's performance is the healthiest way to move forward, and just keep getting better and better every year. I love what you're all doing. I hope that the people listening to your stories will see a little bit of themselves in you and get inspired to explore the possibility of owning a business as well, not just for themselves, but also for their communities, right? There are so many small businesses that need to be transitioned to new owners. And there are so many strong women in the community, and strong men as well, that need to take on that responsibility so that those communities can continue to be served. Thank you so much for your time and your openness and your vulnerability. Thank you for Will for allowing to host this. I think it's a topic that needs to be heard. And so thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come, stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.